moving away from that topic, and thank you for answering that. You handled that very well, but somebody's got to ask the tough questions here, so I guess it'll be me here today, Ken. I had a question. What was it that made the United States decide to go into a joint mission with Russia and other countries in this space mission? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, I know that very few people know that Kennedy had a meeting with Khrushchev, and this decision was made there is to make a joint effort. And then either the no, I was in the Marine Corps in 62, 63 when we had the Cuban thing. It was an attempt to try to get the high technology two countries to work together instead of working separately. Because in a way, we actually outspent Russia going to the moon, and it pretty well led to the breakdown in the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Empire. It was an attempt to try to work together as high technology. I got to work with the cosmonauts that came in during the Apollo-Soyuz missions. Some very fine scientists, engineers, and cosmonauts.
Well, you're
a shame
exactly
that we couldn't
right.
work together. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting though. They had put out some photos of the, let's say, the backside of the moon, regarding possible structures that were there that they say it looked like they were facilities there. And so what's your take on that, the photos that they said that there was possible base on the moon that they had photographed?
All right. Dr. Thornton Page was the director of the Planetary Science Department at NASA at the Johnston Space Center, actually for all of NASA during the Apollo mission. He came to me at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and since I was in charge of the Data and Photo Control Department there, asked me to go and pull a specific reel of the 16-millimeter sequence camera that was mounted on the service module connected to the command module that stayed in orbit while the lunar module went down on the lunar surface. So Mike Collins, it was his responsibility during Apollo 11 to have that camera turned on to make continuous film strips of the orbits, which included, as they would go behind, on the dark side, as people call it, on the back side of the moon. And Dr. Page asked me to pull the film strip from Apollo 14, and this was about a 15-minute reel, because that's about all they could put on that reel. I got it together and took it to the building next to Mission Control, where Dr. Page had 7 of the other astrophysicists and astronomers there. I ran the film, and we're coming around on the back side of the moon, approaching a crater called Tsiolkovsky. And the sun angle on the backside, it was such that about half of the crater was in shadow and the other part was illuminated by the sun. As we approached the crater on the film, you could see a cluster of about 5 illuminated domes, the way they look like if they're illuminated from the inside, in the shade portion of the crater Tsiolkovsky. And it looked like a steam column or something event coming up from one of them. Dr. Page asked me to stop the film. Oh, by the way, the reason he chose me to do that is because I have military experience using a gun sequence camera. And those that don't know what a gun sequence camera is, when the pilots are flying missions, or they're dropping bombs, or they're in an attack and firing, they have a camera that will record what it is that they're watching. This allows them to analyze the film later. They can stop the frames, go multiple frames at a time. They can zoom in close and back out. Well, this was the projector that I used. So Dr. Page had me freeze, zoom in on the crater, look at the illuminated domes, back out, go forward, and he turned to the other scientists there. He says, "Well, boys, what do you think of that?" And they all laughed. It was kind of like it was an inside joke. He had me complete the showing of the film, and I had to check it back in the photo department, which has a top secret requirement to get into the back where we keep things stored. And this is another sidelight for me, throwing for you real fast, is that when I was carrying the film back into there, I went into the inner room. There was a light table about 3 feet by 4 feet. It had some, 10 by 11, or 8.5 by 11 positive transparencies on it, and there were 3 people there, 2 men and a lady, and they were, with ink, they were painting out areas on the surface and on the horizon. and I asked them what they were doing. One of the guys quipped real quick. He says, we're professional strippers. The young lady, she didn't like that too much, I guess, because she said, no, actually what we were doing is we're painting out the stars and things on the horizon because people would get confused about what they're seeing. And, of course, later in years, I've seen where some of the towers and things that on the lib are on what you would consider the horizon on the lunar surface, where some of these, 3 mile or 2 mile high towers would actually be sticking up above the surface. Those things had been painted out as well. Anyway, I checked the film in, and the next day I was to show the same film to the NASA rank and file engineers, and I get it started, I'm coming up on Tsiolkovsky, and I nudged, actually it was my brother there, Dr. Johnston, and I told him, I said, you're not going to believe what we saw on the moon, take a look at this. And as we approach it, there's the dark area, and there's no lights, nothing being shown there. I told the audience that I'm having technical difficulties, stopped the film, took it out, examined it. There were no cuts or splices that I could determine at that time. At any rate, I put it back in, completed the showing, went back to check the film into the photo lab. I ran into Dr. Page at the Lunar Signal Laboratory later that afternoon. I asked him, I said, Dr. Page, what happened to the lights and domes and things we found on the backside of the moon? And he kind of gave me a wink, and he said, there was never anything there.
Well, yeah, I saw that on your YouTube Smithsonian special. You make mention to that exact story verbatim, so you've just told that exactly the way I heard it yesterday. My question is, last year I had came across some photos from the European Space Agency, which showed the possibility on Mars of a community or a civilization on Mars. That the photo had been scrubbed, but they unscrubbed the photo by taking out some of the resolution of it, and if you did a couple of things and you tweaked it a little bit, you're able to see the remnants of the possibility of streets, roads, and buildings and stuff. So it kind of blew me away to see that the possibility that something there might exist. Can you address that, Ken?
Yeah, and you're getting a little far from your microphone. It was a little hard to hear you there. There's no question in my mind about the civilization existing on Mars at one time. And in fact, if you look into some research done by Michael Tellinger, and he wrote a book called The Slave Species of God, and it's with a little g, goes into a lot of explanation. Rather than Anunnaki, it was the Igigi, which was a way station on Mars, as they would transport gold from the Earth to Mars and then on back to Nauru. There's a tremendous amount of data in ancient Sumerian texts and writings that Sitchin had written about, and all, that would give us a clue as to not only our origin, but what took place on Mars. And I have seen, since working on, let's see, Dark Mission, Monuments of Mars, and all, there are so many proof and pictures and things, not only of ancient structures that kind of look like Nagasaki or Hiroshima, where they've been obliterated, but they're still there over a couple 100,000 years. There's still evidence of the ruins. And then down around the south pole of Mars, the evidence of existence of vegetation. We call them trees, or the giant bonsai trees, or whatever. There's so much. Let's think it this way. When we first landed on the moon, we started looking at pictures of Mars. Excuse me, I meant Mars, not moon. Evidence that there was water. NASA took years before they would finally admit that there was evidence of water on the moon. And unfortunately, we have to find the proof and keep hammering away until they just finally give up because you've dumped a bucket of Mars water on top of them.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. There are those that say that there are planets that are hollow. What say you about the moon and Mars?
As far as being hollow?
Yes.
I forgive me. I am having difficulty hearing you because I don't know if you're close to the microphone or not. Of course, I've read about the hollow Earth. Okay, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. What the question is the moon or Mars or any of the planets in the solar system hollow?
The only one that I would, there's several instances, but we used to joke about that, and on Apollo 14 is a good example, Hadley Reel. there are some pictures and things that show, looks like buttresses coming along the canyon, along from Mount Hadley going down into Hadley Reel. It looks like it is part of a structure. And there's a lot of research that goes on that how the moon really came into orbit. Was it a part of the Earth or was it not? And, we can go to Star Wars and we can talk about the Death Star, the giant thing about as big as our moon, which is constructed. When you go to Mars and you look at Phobos, there's very strong evidence that Phobos is a hollowed out not a Dyson sphere, it's not big enough for that, but is a hollow planetoid. And there's probably the moon is could possibly be the same thing. I was concerned about YU-55, the asteroid that just passed us at the beginning of this program, so whether or not it's going to impact on the moon or not. So is it on Apollo 11 and 12, actually on all of the lunar landing missions? One of the things we did after we rendezvoused with the command module, we separated the lunar module from it, backed it away from the command module, and then fired its retro rockets to bring it into a collision with the lunar surface. We had seismograph equipment that we'd put out on the lunar surface, and every time that the lunar module would hit the lunar surface, it would set up a shock wave, and it would ring not only just a few moments, but for hours, giving the indication that the moon was somewhat hollow, whether it was man-made hollow, or I should say intelligently made hollow, or just the way it was formed.